Superheroes are held up as the pillars of their communities, people to aspire to, but they are still complex with their own complex personalities, and they do not always get along with one another, even those they work with most closely. I'm Adam Andrews, this is Top 10 Nerd, and this is the top 10 superhero partners who kinda hate each other. Coming in at number 10 is Daredevil and the Punisher. These two crime-fighting street-level heroes have been butting heads for a hot minute. As with a lot of pairings on this list, to say that they absolutely despise each other is kinda pushing it. Matt Murdock and Frank Castle respect one another, even if their philosophies to crime fighting are in direct contradiction to one another. Matt is a pretty devout Catholic. He's a lawyer. He believes in the criminal justice system, and he's got a pretty strict no life-taking policy, except for maybe like 3 instances that are pretty easy to justify. And then there's Frank. The criminal justice system not working is the very reason his family were taken from him. He believes the system to be broken and that his method of an eye for an eye, if you're a criminal you don't deserve to live, is ingrained into the whole philosophy of his hero activities. They couldn't be more different in terms of their morals, but running in the same circle and working in such close proximity to one another means that they are almost forced to work together, and because of that they have eventually learned how to work together, even begrudgingly. And even though one thinks this horned crime fighter is naive and the other thinks his skull-themed colleague is a pervasion of the system he fights for, they still find a way to make it work. Number 9. Green Arrow and Hawkman. The interesting thing about this somewhat surprising rivalry between two sometimes forgotten Justice League members, no offense to either, is that it's political. Other rivalries in comics are predominantly centered around modus operandi or love interests or personality differences, but this is just straight up that Green Arrow is pretty liberal and Hawkman, being either a centuries-old reincarnated warrior prince or a space cop, and sometimes both, is pretty damn conservative. The debates between these two heroes are pretty intense, and they've both been wrong and right in different instances, which makes for very interesting storytelling and dynamics. Oliver Queen has been paired up with a space cop before, talking Hal Jordan Green Lantern, and while they butted heads from time to time during their travels together, Arrow's vocalization of his political views never seemed to bother the Lantern as much as it bothers Hawkman. Green Arrow is the kind of guy to demand Aquaman opens Atlantis to democratic elections, and Hawkman has been dubbed the ultimate conservative. They just do not work. Number 8. Batman and Guy Gardner. I'm gonna be honest here, I think most of us are on Batman's side with this one. Batman has never really gotten along with Green Lanterns. I can't really tell you why because I don't know enough, so if you do know, share with us in the comments. But what I do know is that of all the Green Lanterns, Guy Gardner is known to be just the most unlikable. He's boisterous, cocky, a big old meathead, and he's got a stupid haircut. At first, Batman and Guy's rivalry was a bit of a joke, but then it pretty quickly changed to the point that only one hero was left as a joke. In 1987, we were given the Justice League International that had an awesome team of heroes including Shazam, Black Canary, Dr. Fate, Blue Beetle, Martian Manhunter, among others, with Batman as their appointed leader. Most people would agree that Batman is a more than qualified leader for a team like this, but one person who didn't take too kindly to Batman's leadership position and even wanted the role for himself was Mr. Gardner. After going on a big old rant and Batman calling Gardner a mongrel, the Lantern takes off his ring and decides to challenge the Dark Knight to a battle of fisticuffs. One punch later, and the Lantern became the biggest laughingstock of the superhero community. Even Superman finds it funny. Number 7. Spider-Man and Wolverine. Spider-Man and Wolverine doesn't really seem like a matchup you'd ever really expect. The funny thing is, they actually really work well together. Most of the time. It's really funny to see these two work together because you've got one of the most quippy, lighthearted, inspiring, and morally positive heroes teamed up with one of the most grumpy, rageful, animalistic, and brutal heroes in the Marvel landscape. The thing here is that while these two may clash, they're almost like brothers. Think like Wolverine as big brother and Spider-Man as little brother. Spider-Man and his snarky ways has a knack for getting under the skin of Wolverine's short temper. But I mean, we've also got instances of Wolverine hitting on Mary Jane, Spider-Man throwing Wolverine out of an Avengers Tower window, and Wolverine being a little too stabby-stabby with his claws for Peter Parker's no-killing preferences. So they have definitely clashed and butted heads. And oh my god, there is also the Ultimate Universe versions of the characters who swapped bodies bodies, with Wolverine being the most creepy creep ever to Peter's girlfriend. But for the most part, when these two heroes show up together, it's a treat. Number 6. Cable and Deadpool. Similar to Wolverine and Spider-Man, most of the times when Deadpool and Cable team up together, it makes for an entertaining read. Almost for the same reasons as Wolverine and Spider-Man 2, honestly. One smarmy guy who talks a lot, and one grizzled guy who talks very little. Always fun. But unlike those two, Deadpool was literally introduced as a villain specifically for Cable. In New Mutants number 98, Deadpool was hired by Tolliver to bring Cable down. The failure of this task put Deadpool on the warpath to try his darndest to bring this incredibly popular 90s hero down. They clashed multiple times, with Deadpool being one of Cable's constantly returning villains. As most people know, the hatred between these two characters didn't last forever, specifically ending when their respective series were cancelled and we were given Cable and Deadpool if looks could kill. Wade gets contracted by the One World Church to steal the facade virus, a new disease that turns everyone blue in order to achieve global equality, with the side effect of people melting. Cable is also fully aware of the virus and has the goal of destroying it, which puts the two heroes head to head. Deadpool eventually gets the upper hand on Cable and gives it to the Church, who turn around and infect both he and Cable with the virus just to test it out. Luckily, using his powers, Cable absorbs Deadpool into him, their genetic structure temporarily bonding. He vomits up Wade's essence, which heals back into his old body. Cable then uses his ship's teleportation matrix, which takes Deadpool along for the ride, and they appear in the same location, graphically bonded together before tearing themselves free of one another. The anti-heroes learn that due to being bonded genetically, Cable's machines recognize them as the same entity. So whenever either of them teleports, the other is along for the ride. So basically, the two are almost forced to eventually get along with each other and have a pretty cool relationship. They're kinda cool. Number 5. Cyclops and Wolverine. Wolverine has had quite the luck with the ladies over his incredibly long history, but despite that, he couldn't seem to let one girl go. That girl was Jean Grey. Jean Grey has pretty consistently declined the advances of our short, temperamental Canadian in favor of her boo, Scott Summers, the consistent leader of the X-Men, Cyclops. They just make for a better couple, despite Scott being kinda the worst sometimes. And Wolverine, he just can't stand that fact. He is pretty consistent, even to the point of being problematic with his advances towards Jean, despite her constant rejection. And Cyclops is no pushover. He is, or I guess was, a Boy Scout, but he is also a pretty strong-willed leader and not someone who takes behavior like Wolverine's lightly, which has led to many clashes between the two over the years. Pretty immature rivalry over their teammate, which has gotten bloody on way too many occasions and is pretty disrespectful to the third person involved, starts as a basis, but over their history, these two have butted heads over more important things. For example, there was a pretty serious difference of opinions in how the X-Men and the students of the school they are an integral part of should be led, causing the schism story. Or there was the whole X-Men versus Avengers thing, where Wolverine seemed to choose the other heroes over his own mutant family. Number 4. Green Arrow and Arsenal. Oliver Queen and Roy Harper's falling out as one-time partners is a bit of a tragic ordeal, and it's mainly because of Roy's infamous decline into the world of substance abuse. Originally, Roy was Green Arrow's first sidekick, Speedy. He was an orphan that Oliver Queen took in. Oliver basically raised Roy. Roy would also join up with the Teen Titans, and he had a good thing going as a member of the Teen Titans, even dating Donna Troy. But a while later, the Titans disbanded, he broke up with Donna Troy, and Oliver ran into serious financial troubles and basically started neglecting Roy, going off around the country with Green Lantern and Black Canary. This was the trigger that sent him down the path of addiction. Oliver came back from a mission to find Roy red-handed, and instead of supporting or comforting his adoptive son, Oliver disowned him, kicked him out on the streets, and gave him a swift punch to the face. As you can imagine, this led to a lot of resentment between the two, and Roy struck out on his own, struggling all the while with his issues. He would go on to become Arsenal and eventually Red Arrow, with the bad blood between him and his adopted dad being smoothed over eventually, but those problems of his addiction and Green Arrow's knack for abandoning Roy came back with a vengeance. Now I gotta change the subject because it's honestly pretty depressing. Let's move on. Yeah. Number 3, Tim Drake and Damian Wayne. Of all the Robins, Tim and Damian have had the most touchy of relationships. It all started when they first met. Tim Drake was the Robin, and Damian, being the son of Batman, decided that apparently the only way to claim what he called his birthright of the Robin mantle was to literally try and take Tim's life, which is a perfect indication of why he was not at all suited to be the Robin. The little psycho. Damian laid an unholy beatdown on Tim with his much more advanced combat skills, almost bringing Tim to the pearly gates. Luckily, he didn't actually achieve this, but it set a tone for the rivalry between these two, especially as they both took on the Robin mantle. As a side note, Tim had to earn Bruce's love. He worked for it, and with his father Jack, he also had to work for that. For Tim, love is something you have to earn and is never unconditional. And this little jumped up spoiled brat comes in here talking about his birthright with Bruce actually giving Damian the love that he didn't really earn. It rubbed Tim the wrong way. Eventually, Damian claimed the Robin title solely for himself and Tim set off as just Red Robin. They've also repaired their relationship somewhat, but of the members of the Bat family, I think there is always tension between these two. Number 2, Spider-Man and Venom. Now this may seem like a cop-out because, well, it kinda is. Venom was one of Spider-Man's greatest villains, basically the literal antithesis to Spider-Man. Venom had almost an obsession for Spider-Man, like a really dangerous symbiotic ex-girlfriend. Venom almost pined for the connection he lost with Spider-Man. When the rejected alien bonded with Eddie Brock, whose life was arguably ruined by both his own and Spider-Man's actions, the combo made for a deadly villain who hated Spider-Man with almost every fiber of his being. When Venom started to lean into the role of being an anti-hero, the only real reason these two began to leave each other alone was because Venom moved across the whole country to San Francisco. I guess they just needed some space because over time they began to accept each other, becoming reluctant allies at times, especially in the Absolute Carnage story, which finally began to see the relationship heal. Eventually, in the aftermath of the King in Black story, almost seeing each other as brothers. The tension is still in the air to a degree if you ask me, and crazy exes be like that sometimes. Number 1, Emma Frost and Jean Grey. Jean Grey and Emma Frost. They are powerful female heroes amongst teams of predominantly male heroes, and they are not afraid to show just how capable they are. They are so similar and yet so different, which naturally leads to both friendship and rivalry at the same time. Emma Frost is known for being cunning, assertive, and brutally blunt. She's also no stranger to going a little dark. Jean Grey, on the other hand, is known for being more empathetic, gentle, and kind, except when she was Dark Phoenix. When they first met in the Dark Phoenix saga, Emma was literally part of the villainous Hellfire Club that manipulated Jean to become the Dark Phoenix in the first place. It is not a good way to start a working relationship. Then there is the pretty large fact that these two share a big old love triangle with Cyclops. I think it's safe to say that Cyclops prefers Jean. She is the one who is consistently stuck in his heart, but that didn't seem to stop him from basically telepathically cheating on Jean with Emma, and then actually being with Emma when him and Jean broke up and Jean died. But like I said, Jean was always in his heart, which doomed him and Emma from the start. Emma Frost and Jean Grey have continuously argued and battled over a wide array of issues throughout their history, but at the end of the day, these two women are actually friends. Friends that have genuine respect for each other and who have had each other's back. They even teamed up together to save Aurora Monroe, Storm, at one point, which displayed both their strengths and weaknesses as incredibly similar but starkly different mutants. And there you go, 10 bitter frenemies. What did you think? Let me know down below, but in the meantime, I'm Adam Andrews, this is Top 10 Nerd, and I'll catch you all on the flippy flop. Peace!